Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are connecting from in the world. My name is Angerrit Lang. For those of you who don't know me, I'm the Executive Director of PHAP, that's short for the International Association of Professionals in Humanitarian Assistance and Protection. It's my great pleasure to welcome you for today's very interesting event, and different from many of the events that we're often organizing at PHAP and with other partners. Today, as you know, we're going to be looking in some detail at some of the potential revisions to the professional standards for protection work as part of an ICRC-led process. Very glad to see so many of you are able to join us for this discussion, presentations and discussion, and really joining from such a wide variety of relevant organizations and from so many different parts of the world. Without further ado, we'll move on to introducing today's session. So as I mentioned, we're looking today at the professional standards for protection work, and we'll benefit from a series of 3 brief presentations on the main proposed changes, updates to the standards. So the professional standards on protection work, we'll hear a little bit about this from our first speaker, were initially published in 2009. They were revised in 2013, and we're now just in the midst of a second revision process led by the ICRC, but involving a number of different human rights and humanitarian NGOs and UN agencies. We are pleased to have with us today several people who have been deeply involved in this process with the update, the review and update of the standards. So first, we're going to hear from Guillaume Ravier, who is since October 2012 has been the head of the protection of the civilian population unit in the protection division at the ICRC in Geneva, International Committee of the Red Cross. He leads the revision of the professional standards for protection work and has been for some time. He's been with the ICRC since 2000, mostly working in the field as a protection coordinator in a number of locations. And before joining the ICRC, he worked with UNHCR in Bosnia and Herzegovina. We're also very pleased to welcome back Jenny McAvoy, who is now the Director of Protection at Interaction, and there is responsible for developing and leading collaborative efforts of Interaction's members and other interagency fora to enhance humanitarian protection. Prior to joining Interaction, Jenny worked with the OCHA Policy Branch Protection and Displacement section, where she focused on the UNSC agenda on civilian protection, as well as protection mandates of peacekeeping operations, among many other issues. And previously, Jenny worked for 13 years with both local and international NGOs in field operations, primarily in Southeast Asia and Sudan. And then third, we have with us today Catherine Starup, who's the Senior Global Protection Advisor at the Danish Refugee Council and brings more than 20 years of experience in humanitarian work. Catherine has specialized in particular in protection, also very much in protection information management, and will benefit from her experience in that area today, as well as mixed migration and displacement solutions. Catherine also has extensive field experience both in headquarters positions, extensive experience both in headquarters positions and in the field, primarily in Africa and Asia. So the structure for today's session, we're going to begin with Guillaume as he's leading the process. We'll hear a little bit from him about the process and a bit of an overview of what's in store for us, and then we'll have 3 dedicated presentations on 3 specific chapters where there are there are more changes proposed and potentially in the works. So we'll get to hear a little bit more in detail about the reasoning behind some of the proposed changes and how those might look. And of course, this is all in the context of the hope that many, or indeed all of you, will be able to take the time yourselves to contribute to this revision process. As you will have seen in the announcement messages about today's event, this discussion today, the presentations and discussion, are really meant to just jumpstart and contribute to the consultation process and request for feedback from individuals and organizations who are who have a stake in the protection standards, so the professional standards for protection work. And there's a survey running now, and it will be open now through the end of this year, that gives you a great opportunity, if you can take the time with that, to actually provide detailed feedback on the different sections of the document. So very much hoping that you'll be able and willing to do that, and glad that you're here with us now to get an introduction to some of the more significant changes, which hopefully you may also be able to contribute to. So then, without further delay, I will give the floor over to Guillaume.
Hello, good evening, good morning to those in different time zones. So my name is Guillaume. Thanks a lot, Angarat, for hosting this webinar. It's really a pleasure to be here with all of you and to have the opportunity to discuss this revision process and to collect, hopefully, a lot of feedback on the draft documents. So the professional standards, as Angarat mentioned, we are preparing now the third edition. The first edition had been published in 2009. Yes, I'm moving the slides. So we are the first edition had been published in 2009. A second edition was published just over 3 years ago, and we are already preparing a third edition. So it's a document published by ICRC, but it's not just ICRC's vision or standards that are represented in there. We have tried since the beginning to ensure that we reflect the consensus of the views of both the humanitarian and the human rights communities regarding what are the essential standards for protection work. So we really talk about the bedrock standards, the bit of which protection action should not be or must not be undertaken. We are not addressing how to implement or what type of activities can be implemented in protection work, and here we just confirm that there is a very wide variety of activities that can be implemented. Many different agencies and NGOs have different ways of working, and these activities are complementary, but they must all be implemented in conformity with the professional standards. The fact that it's addressed to both humanitarian and human rights actors is an important point, and it's one of the few documents that is bridging the gap, in a way, the pre-existing gap between humanitarian workers and human rights workers, showing that there is great commonality or great areas of commonalities in what we do. We try, beyond the standards, we also try to provide a few guidelines, some elements regarding some explication, background information regarding the different standards and how to implement them, how they must be taken into account. Some of them, so the standards are imperative, while the guidelines are more indicative and apply differently to different types of activities or different types of context and organization. So the process is led by ICRC, but from the beginning we have worked with an advisory group composed of about 20 persons representing the variety of the humanitarian and human rights world, UN agencies, NGOs, and people who have very different backgrounds, some representing agencies who have dedicated protection activities, while others representing NGOs who have more assistance activities, but also a strong interest in protection. The revision, we decided to undertake a third edition. You may consider that it was a bit early for a document published only 3 years ago, but discussing with the advisory group, we recognized the need for a revision because of two main elements: the progress in our own reflection in different areas of, in relation to the challenges we face in the field, but also the evolution outside of our world, the evolution of the the world and the changes it imposes on us. And this is reflected, for instance, in Chapter 2 that Jenny will be presenting regarding protection strategies. These our thinking has progressed a lot over the the 3 past years regarding how we implement protection strategies and how we try to measure their impact. So we wanted to take that into account. But regarding Chapter 6, to a great extent, it's also the world around us that has evolved, and the regulatory framework regarding the protection of sensitive information has created some important obligations, and it's essential that everyone managing sensitive information, and in particular personal information, is aware of these constraints and is able to manage information in a professional way. And this, Catherine will be presenting later the main changing in Chapter 6. We will also be, I will be speaking a bit about the changes we are proposing in Chapter 3 regarding the protection architecture, in particular in relation to our engagement with peace operations, peacekeepers and other multinational forces. Here also their role in the field has evolved, the basis under which they work has evolved, and it's important that protection workers in the field are aware of these changes. So we won't be able to discuss all the changes today because the proposed revision is quite substantial. These are the 7 chapters of the document, and we are revising to a greater or lesser extent all of them. We will discuss only the 3 main areas of revision today, but there are many smaller revisions, precisions, clarifications in the other chapters. We have circulated all the drafts they have been posted by PHAP on the internet, and we have tried also to circulate them to many agencies for everyone to provide us their feedback, because the work we do with the advisory group regarding the draft document is only the first stage of the reflection. We tried together to map the areas that required some changes, some clarification. We prepared some drafts, but then, and this is the current phase, we want a very broad consultation involving all practitioners in the field to ensure that what we propose effectively reflects the common thinking of the humanitarian and human rights community and is sufficiently clear and clearly articulated in order to allow to respond to the challenges that colleagues are facing in the field. So that's why it's really great to see so many people, in particular people talking to us from or listening to us and contributing from the field, because we want this document to be something that is a living document and really a tool that allows us to implement better protection strategies to respond to the threats people are facing and to reach an impact on their safety and well-being. These are the key elements. So I will come back later. I will leave now again the field to Angarad and to Jenny to present Chapter 2.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Guillaume, and thank you for the opportunity to collaborate on this effort to really have an extensive consultation. It's a great opportunity and a pleasure to have this webinar with you as well. So now we will give the floor to Jenny, then, as Guillaume introduced, to speak to us a bit about the specific chapter on managing protection strategies and some of the revisions there. Over to you, Jenny.
Thanks very much, Angarad, and to PHAP and to ICRC for organizing this webinar. I agree with Guillaume. This is quite an exciting opportunity to speak with you all about the revisions to the professional standards for protection. And I think we're in quite an important moment in the humanitarian community to try to understand what role professional standards can play in ensuring that we are as effective as possible in addressing the protection concerns that we all see in a range of humanitarian crises. And I certainly found that this really came out quite a lot in the discussions we had around managing protection strategies. So what I thought I would do is just briefly walk you through what some of the main proposed changes are. to Chapter 2 on managing protection strategies. So to start, just very briefly, as a refresher, the previous version, the second edition that was published in 2013, contained these 3 standards and guidelines concerning managing protection strategies. And as you can see, you know, they're sort of fairly straightforward in terms of there must be a protection analysis prior to engaging in protection activities. This analysis must be the basis for prioritization and corresponding strategies. Secondly, that the strategy should be translated into SMART objectives with clear outcomes and a plan of action. And lastly, monitoring and evaluation. So all of this is quite straightforward and unsurprising. What we found, though, was the need to dig a little bit deeper and elaborate. And in 2011, 2012, the organization that I work for, Interaction, actually launched a process to try to dig a little bit deeper into what we call results-based protection. And the main impetus behind this was a recognition that quite a lot of protection work was very heavily focused on activities and output, and less so on concrete results and impact in terms of real changes in people's lives that should be occurring as a result of our effort to address protection concerns. And indeed, you know, speaking with a number of humanitarian practitioners, you know, people are very reluctant to say, you know, what is the desired outcome of our effort to address protection issues? What does the positive result actually look like or intended to look like? So through a series of consultations over the course of the past few years, the collection of examples from humanitarian practitioners across the world, we tried to tease out what do results look like for protection, what does a protection outcome look like, and indeed, how do you get there? And in doing so, we've been able to start to tease out what are the critical methods and approaches at each stage in the program cycle that support measurable results and protection outcomes. And if you're interested in finding out more about the key elements that we've identified, I've provided the link there. So you feel free to explore on our website. So the challenge then became, how do we translate what we've learned about delving into sort of a more results-based and outcome-oriented approach to protection, and picking up on the momentum and motivation within the humanitarian community to do so, to distill what we can consider to be professional standards. So through this exercise, I think we've been able to distill a few key things. Rather than walk you through all of the revisions to this chapter, because they are quite extensive, I thought I would walk you through the most significant proposed modifications and additions. I would say the first is a stronger emphasis on protection outcomes manifested as reduced risk experienced by affected and vulnerable people. And, you know, this potentially sounds, you know, not very surprising. Indeed, that's what we should be aiming for. But we were surprised to find, you know, very few protection programs actually articulating the reduced risk that they were aiming for, as reflected, you know, through their conversations and their engagement with affected people. So that means a reorientation in overall framing, the language that is used, and so on. It also has consequences for how we approach analysis, decision-making, design of programs, and so on. And that's where the standards, you know, start to get to a little bit more precision. So there's an elaboration in the proposed revisions to the standards an elaboration on protection analysis. What does that actually look like? And the emphasis is very much on a detailed and context-specific analysis of risk patterns as the basis for prioritization, strategies, the mobilization of other key actors who should play a role to solve a particular problem, and as the basis for identifying the key indicators of the risk which is going to be addressed. And this protection analysis should involve, inter alia, a two-way communication flow with affected people in an ongoing way. It should involve dialogue with duty bearers, and it should involve a multidisciplinary perspective. And this is something that came out very, very strongly in the conversations that Interaction facilitated, and basically a recognition that protection is so multifaceted and so diverse that, you know, it's impossible to have maximum impact by working in silos. And indeed, we need to think in a multi-sectoral, multidisciplinary way and bring in the expertise and capacities and mandates of a wide range of actors in order to definitively solve protection problems. The next most significant modification was to introduce the idea of developing a causal logic for the action to be taken. Basically sort of setting out, you know, what action is going to be taken with what expected result to address the risk factors and pull in the range of sectors and disciplines and actors relevant to solving the problem. So this causal logic should describe the pathways, the sequence of actions, and the milestones to address the risk factors and reduce risk, and describe the roles of the different sectors and actors contributing to the desired outcome. It should identify assumptions, and this then becomes the basis for setting out the SMART objectives. So the idea of SMART objectives is still very much there, but placed within sort of the broader articulation of the causal logic for the intervention to be undertaken. Going back to protection analysis a little bit, there's also emphasis that protection analysis should not be a one-off exercise, but should be undertaken continuously. So once you've undertaken that initial protection analysis and you've been able to disaggregate all of the risk factors that are contributing to the situation that people are facing in the crisis that you're working in, that should then become the basis for ongoing monitoring and ongoing protection analysis. And this should allow practitioners to continuously adjust their strategies as necessary to reduce risk over time. So whatever causal logic you come up with should subsequently be adapted in order to respond to new information, to new events, to new strategies, the roles of additional actors, and so on. And the last point I wanted to emphasize is the whole bit around monitoring and evaluation. So in the previous version of the standards, we had put monitoring and evaluation as one standard. But we actually realized the importance of separating these two out. So monitoring was treated, as explained previously, as a process of continuous analysis which should support real-time adaptation of programs, whereas evaluation, we approached more in terms of making a serious investment in learning and informed risk-taking in order to solve problems. And this requires arguably sort of building up a culture of a learning organization, very consciously internalizing learning arising from this for future programs, and making quite a serious investment in evaluations of ongoing and completed programs. So lastly, just to say that your input is very much welcome. I'd love to hear some thoughts on whether the proposed standards and guidelines are appropriate for recognition as professional standards, Are the descriptions and explanations clear? Can the examples be improved? If so, what examples should be used? And if there's anything missing from this proposed revision to Chapter 2. And back over to you, Angharad.
Okay, excellent. Thank you, Jenny. Actually, I've just had a question come in. It's a question of clarification. So if you don't mind, I will go ahead and pose it to you right now rather than waiting until the end. So we had a question from Simon wondering about the use of the term causal logic and wondering if by causal logic, are you proposing, or is the suggestion that protection actors should have a theory of change for their action? So for you, is causal logic another term for theory of change, or would you see it meaning something different, perhaps broader?
Yeah, excellent. That's a useful question. So in our view, theory of change and the methodologies and approaches associated with theories of change are one type of causal logic. What we wanted to do was avoid being overly prescriptive because we realized that different organizations have different methods and tools and indeed organizational cultures. So we don't want to insist on a single approach or methodology, for example, those associated with, the kind of literature that you see with theories of change. Many organizations may find the existing tools and materials for theory of change really useful, and I think there's a lot we can gain from them. But we see the term causal logic as a bit more generic and allows people to, explore and develop and use, whatever tools that help to create a causal logic that seems most appropriate for themselves, their situation, the context where they're working, the organizations where they're working, and so on.
Okay, excellent. Thanks so much for that, Jenny. And we will move on now to hear a presentation from Guillaume. We'll come back and walk us through points regarding specifically Chapter 3. So over to you, Guillaume. You have the floor.
Thanks a lot, Angharad, and thanks to Jenny for this presentation of Chapter 2. So yes, now an overview of some of the changes in Chapter 3, in particular regarding the interface with UN peace operations and other internationally mandated military and police forces. This is something that wasn't at all in the first edition. At the time, there had been no consensus regarding what type of interaction protection actors should seek with UN missions and other types of military forces or multinational military forces. There was no consensus at the time. When we prepared the second edition, we managed to find a consensus, an agreement that it's important to engage peace operation. We should not just focus on the local forces, the local parties to conflict and violence, but also take into account the presence of UN peace operations, recognize their specific protection role. They have protection obligations. Most of them now have, for instance, a POC, protection of civilians mandate, with some specific obligations in addition to the obligation deriving from IHL and other norms. So recognizing this complementarity is essential, but at the same time we wanted to ensure that whenever we engage with peace operation, we avoid confusion between their roles and our own responsibility, our own approach, because this could be detrimental to the ability, in particular, of humanitarians in the field to access population and to do their work. So this recognizing this tension that needs to be managed between the complementarity and the need for engagement on one side and the necessity to avoid confusions. We also, in the 2013 edition, we also distinguished between UN peace operations and other UN-mandated forces. These are, for instance, ISAF in Afghanistan or AMISOM in Somalia, so forces led by regional organization under a UN mandate. And we, in a way, we distinguished the wording is a bit different. We say in the standards that UN peace operations, that is we should engage, and it's a necessity to engage and to try to achieve protection outcome through this engagement. With other forces, it's a bit in a way a lighter guideline, saying that we should consider engagement, but depending on the outlook of these forces, they are usually offensive forces that are perceived by the local population and local actors as sorry, there is a bit of noise. Now it should be fixed. Sorry for the interference. Usually these other forces are more offensive, are perceived by the local population as more, or by the local forces as hostile, and so managing the relation with them, the interaction with them, will require even more care in order to avoid facing difficulties in the field. So these elements are still in the document, in the proposed revision, but we wanted to push a bit further than these elements, to precise a bit our thinking. First of all, to take into account the latest development. Here there have been the high-level panel on peace operations and other elements of guidance, doctrine, or reflection around the role of peace operations in protection of civilians. So we wanted to take stock of these developments over the past 3 years and provide a bit more background explanation to practitioners on what are the protection responsibilities of UN missions in particular, what is the UN approach to protection, how they peace operation frame their own responsibilities regarding protection. It's important that we understand their own vision of protection. And also we wanted to underline the articulation of responsibilities in UN missions. In the first edition, in the second edition, published in 2013, the focus was a lot on the military component of peace operations, and we felt it was important to underline also the civilian component that also has protection responsibilities, and stress that focusing only on the military component is not sufficient, because the protection responsibilities are the responsibilities of the whole mission, and it's important to address problems at the right level and to the right persons in order to ensure subsequent action. So these are a few of the precisions we made in the backgrounds. And this is the outlook of the main standard. So there is still one standard regarding the necessity to understand the role and responsibilities of the UN peace operation, the specific mandate, the POC strategy that has been developed on the basis of this mandate, and so on. Then we recommend proactive engagement with the peace operation. Obviously, on the harm they may cause, this is quite obvious. They may be, in some cases, responsible for some harm to civilians, so it's important to address it to them. But it should not be necessarily the only issue we address with the peace operation. We may also engage them on their responsibility to act, to take action in order to protect people from harm caused by other actors, to improve the protection of the civilian population, even if they are not directly responsible for the harm that has been caused. And we also want to engage them on the support they provide to local forces and authorities, and how this support can be a source of additional protection or contribute to some further harm to the population. So we felt it was important to spell out these 3 areas of potential dialogue. And as underlined in the background, we recommend proactive engagement not only with the military chain of command, but also with the civilian hierarchy and possibly at different levels in the field, but also, if possible and applicable, at New York level, in order to ensure that some feedback is provided to those who plan operations or who develop the policies and guidance for peace operations. So also obviously engage the chain of command, but also potentially engage here also, depending on the capacity of different protection actors, but also consider engaging the troops contributing countries and the police contributing countries, because not everything or some of the issues that we document in the field may find their root causes not just in UN policy, but also in the country of origin of the contingents. It may find their causes in the policy, in the training, in the equipment provided to the troops that are not adequate, and that result in problems in the field. So considering an engagement with the countries of origin is also important. And finally, we stress again the importance of the complementarity to achieve protection outcome between multinational forces and humanitarian actors, but at the same time insist on the necessity to prevent confusion of roles that could be detrimental to our work. So this is a quick overview of the main areas. We also maintain the distinction between peace operation, UN peace operations, and other multinational forces that I explained earlier. This is still in the document, and in this chapter there are a few other issues that are revised beyond peace operation. We also try to strengthen the importance, give more weight to the importance of engaging armed non-state actors, armed groups. This is a legitimate endeavor for humanitarian and human rights protection actors, and we want to stress the legitimacy of this work in the face of more and more challenges by states in particular, who say that it gives them legitimacy and other such position. We want to stress that it's a legitimate endeavor, but at the same time that it's a complex one that cannot be improvised, so we also have collectively a responsibility to do it professionally. And finally, we also seek to address the notion of countering these notions that are more and more present in the public debate, countering violent extremism, that can also lead to some new challenges for humanitarian and human rights protection workers, and so we want to give a fairly clear position on what is our collective vision on this. That's it for the quick overview of Chapter 3.
Okay, excellent. Thank you very much, Guillaume, for this presentation. And any of you who may have specific questions or comments on the elements just presented by Guillaume on this chapter, please do take a moment to type them in, and we will be turning to those in the discussion at the end of the event. So now we will move on to Catherine. We'll be hearing from Catherine about the subject of Chapter 6, specifically looking at managing sensitive protection information. So Catherine, I will hand the floor over to you.
Thank you very much, Ankaret and Piap and Guillaume and colleagues, and it's excellent to see so many colleagues online participating today. My name is Catherine Starup. I work for the Danish Refugee Council, and I've been part of and a member of the advisory group on the professional standards for a long time, and also in this third revision of the standards. Now, we've always had a Chapter 6, in fact, in the standards since they were made back in 2009, which points to the importance and attention needed to how we collect, analyze, store, share, disseminate, and use protection data and information. Because protection data and information is inherently sensitive, and it needs to be managed in a principled and systematic and safe manner. So that's sort of the background to this chapter. When it comes to the proposed revision, Guillaume was pointing to this earlier, and I believe that Chapter 6 is maybe the chapter that has seen or is seeing the most substantive changes this time around. Guillaume pointed out to the changes in our own field of work as well as the outside world. And I have chosen to focus on 4 elements and 4 proposed changes or developments that are significant and that will be reflected in the revised Chapter 6. So these are the new technologies, data protection and privacy, the distinction and difference between personal data and sensitive information, and the recognition of looking at the full cycle, the full process of protection information management. Now I'll look at these 4 elements one by one. When it comes to technologies, and now I put new in citation because they're not necessarily that new. Some of these technologies have been around even for a few decades already, but we are using them. Drones, mobile devices, data analytics, data mining, big data, crowdsourcing platforms and so forth. We are using it, humanitarian and human rights organizations, and these technologies, and as well as the methods that goes with them, allow for very fast data collection, sometimes enabling us to gather huge quantities of data and collecting data without actually meeting the individuals, the communities, the affected people. And instead, some of these technologies allow affected population to rely on the capacity of them to transmit information on unfolding protection events, incidents, their needs in real time. We are challenged using these technologies and see challenges around the use of these technologies, because it does indeed pose some challenges, some threats to the right to privacy, the sensitivity of personal data and the sensitivity of protection information as such, risks of data breaches and so forth. So that's the first element and the developments out there that we saw a need to incorporate into this revised Chapter 6. The second element I want to focus on is around the right to privacy and the protection of personal data. Now again, for many years we've had conventions, guidelines, resolutions, national legislation, regional legislation, and lately, for example, the European Union's General Data Protection Regulation. All regulatory developments and documents to deal with the impact of the fundamental right to privacy and protection of personal data. So that's not new, but we've seen an increase use of an increased number of these regulatory frameworks that has provided the necessity to look at how we deal with the challenge of working and ensuring the right to privacy and personal data. There's a missing slide, but anyway, because the challenge for us is indeed how we balance protecting fundamental individual rights around privacy and personal data with the necessity and the relevance and importance of processing and making use of personal data for humanitarian action and in our protection work. So how we can ensure a good balance and how we can address the challenge of the compatibility, if you like, of these data protection provisions with the humanitarian human rights activities and the protection activities and the work that we do in the field. So that's the second element and developments out there that we wanted to incorporate into this revised Chapter 6, looking at personal data protection and the right to privacy. Then linked to that, very linked to that, is challenges around sensitive information. Now, sensitive information is characterized or defined by the information that if there's unauthorized access or disclosure of this, it may impact severely the integrity, the safety, and the dignity of people. But the important point here is that when we look, and there is, for good reasons, a great emphasis on protection of personal data, but sensitive information is more than that. Sensitive information covers a wide variety of different data and information that may indeed be very sensitive sensitive and have real ramifications for the affected population. So it's not only personal data, it's also personal data, but it may also very well be information around location of communities, or bringing attention to a particular group of people and their protection needs. It may be sharing not individual incidents, because that would be personal data, but sharing the monitoring of trends on incidents of abuses, of rights violations, of photos, videos, and so forth. And again, not necessarily only individual photos, thereby personal data, but in general photos and footage from context that may indeed be sensitive and have real ramifications for the affected population. Now, and linked to that, and coming back to the new technologies, the challenge is also that we have now today available these means by which we instantaneously and very efficiently can share this kind of information on digital platforms and social media in real time. That poses a whole lot of new risks, but certainly also new opportunities that we need to be able to handle, and handle with care. Now, there was actually a pre-submitted question I saw about the target audience, if you like, of the standards as such. And we have had a lot of discussions, and we are trying to, throughout the standards, making very clear for whom these standards are. It is, of course, first and foremost for protection actors, humanitarian, human rights actors working in the area of protection, but it is also for other colleagues, partners who work in the field and may come across, and in this context be dealing with sensitive information that can have real risks for the affected population. So it may also indeed, and that's an element we're also clarifying further in this revised Chapter 6, be very relevant for our advocacy campaigning teams and colleagues. It may be relevant for other sectoral colleagues. It may be relevant to the partners with whom we work on these new technologies in the collection and analysis of data through, for example, crowdsourcing platforms. There it was, the challenge. The fourth and last element and development and important element that we wanted to take into the revised Chapter 6 is the recognition that these risks around and the challenges we have around managing sensitive protection information goes throughout the cycle, if you like, or the whole process of protection information management. Now, protection information management is an evolving discipline with a wide range of different systems, approaches, methods, tools, and not least technologies as we've seen. So the work with protection data and information carries with it a lot of inherent risks and sensitivity throughout the entire process. From when you get the idea or the request or the need to collect data, you think about what data already exists, you analyze that, you design your system, you choose which tools and approaches to use, you collect your data, you process your data, you analyze it, you store it, and there is also a lot of sensitivities and risks around the very storage of data and information. You share it, you transfer and use it. Now, in the past, we've had a tendency, I would argue, to emphasize the point in time where we know it's not here. Anyway, sorry. There's been some processing of my PowerPoint slides. We've had a tendency to focus on the step of the cycle and the process where we're collecting the data. And indeed, there is a lot of risks involved and challenges involved at this stage where we are directly engaging with the affected population and collecting data. But we also see today that indeed we can collect data without even having contact with the affected population. And we've had an emphasis on the point in time when we are sharing and making use, disseminating the data. But we equally need to have and bring attention to the phases where we are reviewing secondary data, analyzing what is already out there, and the point in time where we're analyzing, processing, and storing, maintaining our data. So that was the fourth element, bringing attention to all the various steps of the protection information management cycle or process, if you like. Linked to that, we have also in the proposed revisions of Chapter 6 recognized that there are indeed some standards that we have chosen to call the overarching standards, because these are standards that do not only apply to one point in time of the process of managing protection information, but they apply throughout the whole process. So what we've done in Chapter 6 is that we have compiled these overarching standards in one place and emphasized that these standards all apply throughout the whole process or throughout the whole cycle. Again, I mean, most of these standards that you see here on the slide are not new. They were already in the old Chapter 6. Some of them we have further elaborated and emphasized. A few of them are new. I just want to bring your attention to two of these principles. One is the defined purpose, which emphasizes that protection data and information management must serve specific needs and purposes, and that the purpose must be clearly defined, communicated, and be proportional to both the identified risks, the costs, vis-a-vis the expected response, and be aimed at action for protection outcomes. So it's a very action-oriented standard, emphasizing, maybe to paraphrase this standard, is to say that, I mean, the main message here is do not collect this data and information if you're not going to make use of it for action and for protection outcomes. The other standard I wanted to emphasize, which was already there in the past also, but has been given even greater emphasis this time around, is the one about risk and impact assessment. And again, that to emphasize that necessity of doing such risk and impact assessment goes throughout the whole cycle. So what we're doing in Chapter 6 now, in the revised Chapter 6, is we're providing further examples and guidance and references to more materials on this matter. It is indeed important that you do a risk analysis, and it's on us, it's our responsibility. We bear the responsibility to assess the risks to the persons providing information and to take the necessary measures to avoid negative consequences for those from whom we are seeking information. So that's being emphasized, and it's being emphasized that this is an ongoing process, that you need to regularly revisit and update your risk assessment throughout the whole process. Now, before I go to speaking briefly about how this new proposed revised Chapter 6 has been structured in terms of the structure and the contents, I want to emphasize that it's been very important for us in the advisory group working on the standards and the revision of these throughout, that we make good linkages and that we ensure to build the linkages and the synergies with other ongoing existing projects and initiatives that are working within the same field that we are, and in this case for Chapter 6 within protection information management. So to give two examples, there is the Brussels Privacy Hub ICRC project, which is a project aimed at developing and providing guidance on data protection, and with a particular focus on these new technologies and how to go about that. Another example I wanted to bring out is the DRC and UNHCR co-led Protection Information Management Initiative, the PIM initiative. And the objective of this work within Protection Information Management, or PIM as we like to call it, is really enabling us to provide quality data and information on the protection of people in displacement situations, and to do so in a safe, reliable, and meaningful way. We are working together, UNHCR and DRC, with a whole range and an increasing number of UN, NGO, academia colleagues within protection and IM to do this work. And what we specifically do within this initiative is that we are aimed at closing the middle ground between the ideas and the very concrete tools that we use in our daily protection information management work. So we aim to close this this middle ground with the development of a conceptual framework which comprise the definitions, the principles, the structure, the language, the guidance, and builds the capacity to do protection information management work better with a view to have quality protection outcomes. Now to summarize and share with you how we are going to and propose to restructure the contents of Chapter 6. It falls in 3 parts. So you have a part 1, which is about the evolving field of protection information management, defining what protection information management is and defining some of these key concepts, because it is indeed an evolving field and there are many different concepts out there and terms being used. We speak about what the objective is of protection data and information management, and we speak about what the risks and sensitivities are. Then in the part 2 we speak about, and we have compiled, as I've said earlier, these overarching standards that apply throughout the whole process of protection information management, and in light of the challenges around privacy and protection of personal data, we have a dedicated section on specifically protection of personal data. And then lastly, the 3rd section is around the standards as they apply and are relevant to the individual steps of the protection information management cycle or process. So step by step, these 4 steps that I shared earlier, we are elaborating and explaining about the relevant standards there. That's also it from me for now. Like for the rest of the standards and the rest of the chapters, we look very much forward to your feedback, your suggestions as to the relevance of what we have now compiled in this chapter, if we are indeed sufficiently capturing the challenges out there, both within our own field of work as well as the outside world, and if it's sufficiently clear also those examples and reference we are making throughout the chapter. Thank you very much, and over to you, Ankaret.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Catherine. Very much appreciate it. A really interesting presentation, a lot of new material there, I think, for a lot of people. We have one actually quick follow-up question that I'll pose to you first, specifically on this chapter before we then move into the more general discussion. We have a question coming in from Kelly, who is pointing out that as far as she understands, there's a problem sometimes of sensitive data getting stored in the, she says, the proverbial basement, forgotten but somehow still accessible. And so she's wondering about a principle or a standard specifically related to data destruction. Is that a concern or a best practice that is addressed in the proposed changes?
We do indeed have a standard and a narrative around data security, which also speaks around both the physical data and electronic data, and how also we store, destruct, and maintain that data. Specifically on the destruction, no, not in that detail, but there will be reference to other agencies and other pieces of work on with more detailed guidance and principles for this.
Okay, great, thank you.
But I think it points back to the importance of looking throughout the whole process again, you know, so also what happens in terms of the storage and indeed destruction or deletion of data. I mean, what happens and what are the principles or standards for those processes. Very important.
Okay, thanks so much. So for the discussion of the Q&A portion now, I do have a number of questions that have come in, and I'll propose to group them and then pass them around the panel, because I think a number of the questions are, they could be taken at the broader level, looking at the overall professional standards. They could also be taken more specifically at the chapter level. So I'll pose 3 questions and go with this set of three, first to Guillaume, first to Jenny, then to Guillaume, and then to Catherine. And feel free, all of you, to pick up on any one or all three of the questions raised. So first of all, a question from Simon, wondering, is it really possible, or how is it possible to define protection standards that can truly address all agencies' engagement with protection activities, spanning both dedicated protection agencies as well as those seeking to mainstream or integrate protection? So that's the first one from Simon. Second question from Ahmed. The question is, has the Syrian context in particular been a driver for this this adaptation, this review and revision of the professional standards for protection work? The context of Syria, has that been part of the consideration when going just 3 years later for a new revision? And then finally in this set, a question from Marielle. Wondering if there is a link between the revision of the professional standards for protection work with the recently updated IASC protection policy. So just to summarize again, we have the question of protection standards spanning both dedicated protection activities and those seeking to mainstream or integrate. Second was the question of Syria potentially being a driver for the revision. And third was the question of was there a link with the updated IASC protection policy. So we'll go first to Jenny. Over to you, Jenny.
Thanks, Angharad. I think I'll probably focus on questions 1 and 3. First of all, in terms of whether it's possible to define standards relevant and applicable to all types of actors, indeed, that is the challenge. And what can we identify in terms of a professional standard? And I'm sure Guillaume and Catherine will both have more to say on this. But I think that the way to view this is not in terms of prescriptive approaches to address protection. Of course, every organization has its own specialization, its own mandate, its own competencies, its own ways of working. So the idea behind establishing professional standards is to try to cut across that and perhaps address the issues at a level beyond specializations and mandates, and say, okay, regardless of what problem you're trying to solve, regardless of what capacity, competency, or mandate you are bringing to bear to address that problem, what is it that we can say is a professional standard in order to do so? And I actually think Catherine's presentation on protection information management speaks to that in a very clear way, as it relates to what sort of responsibilities we can conceive of as applicable to ourselves as professional humanitarian actors, as it relates to the protection of sensitive data, professional management of information, which the mismanagement of information has huge consequences for people's lives and so on. And I think that the more that we conceive of the broader scope of what we're trying to achieve as humanitarians in terms of protection outcomes, the more we should be able to bring to bear the ethical, moral, and professional considerations and indeed evolution of those ways of working and standards across the humanitarian community, and to try to distill them as professional standards. I would certainly be interested to hear whether there are people pick up on things which are unimplementable. or perhaps get too much into the weeds or the how-to. But I think we've been very conscious in this process to maintain a focus on what can be considered to be a professional standard. Regarding the relationship between the professional standards and the recently adopted IASC protection policy, I'm very glad for that question, because in fact there's not a direct link in terms of necessarily cross-referencing, but there is a very close link conceptually, I would say. And one reason I feel quite confident about adopting some of the new elements in the revisions to Chapter 2 is because of the consultations and the drafting process for the IASC protection policy, in which it became very clear that indeed the broader humanitarian community was moving towards a much more robust approach to protection analysis, a much stronger orientation towards protection outcomes, the recognition to establish the overall causal logic of what it is we're trying to achieve, a much greater awareness of the sensitivity of managing information, of managing relationships with a wide array of actors and so on. So I would say that both the revisions to the professional standards and the substance of the IASC protection policy are driven by the same motivations and picking up on the same trends in the broader humanitarian community towards a much stronger protection outcome and the range of things that need to be done in order to definitively achieve protection outcomes.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. And we will now move to Guillaume. Guillaume, the floor is yours.
Thanks a lot, Angerad, and thanks, Jenny, for these first answers. So I will answer to the second question on whether the Syrian context demanded a special adaptation of the standards. Well, it's not. The decision to revise the standards was not specifically linked to the situation in Syria, but obviously in our thinking during the revision, we take into account the ongoing practice and challenges faced by the population and by protection actors in the field. And so, so we certainly try to learn and integrate from some of the biggest crises like Syria today. So we and we are also quite keen on having some specific feedback from the field in this respect. Do what we propose reflect the challenges of people working involved in the response to the crisis in Syria, or are there some important challenges that are left unaddressed? But certainly then, for the practitioners in the field, the standards are only a basis from which to work. So you won't implement the standards in the same way in Syria and in plenty of other areas. There is a dimension of contextualization depending on the specific threats, for instance, the dynamic of violence, the conditions of access, and so on. There is always a need for contextualization of the standards. And maybe to complement just a bit the responses of Jenny, with which I fully agree, just to stress on the first question regarding the distinction between dedicated protection activities and mainstreaming. The standards we are discussing now are mostly addressed to agencies undertaking dedicated protection activities, but at the same time there are many areas that are still relevant for other actors. And as Catherine mentioned, for instance, Chapter 6 is an important reference beyond dedicated protection activities and even beyond protection work, because in whatever humanitarian undertaking, we always collect and manage some data, and some data that is collected outside of protection work can still be extremely sensitive and must be managed with great care. If you take the example of psychosocial support to victims of sexual violence, it's a medical or health support to victims of conflict. It may not have any protection aims in the sense of the dedicated protection activities. It's the response to the needs of the victims directly, but obviously it's very sensitive data that must be managed very professionally in order to ensure that we don't expose the victims and their families to additional problems. So the standards may be relevant to many actors beyond those who consider themselves as protection actors, but it's also important to stress the existence of the minimum standards for protection mainstreaming that were published in 2012 or 2013 by World Vision and other NGOs, and that are very relevant for mainstreaming protection in assistance activities.
Okay, thanks so much, Guillaume. And we'll hand the floor now to Catherine. Catherine, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Not so much to add. I very much agree, and thanks Jenny and Guillaume. Just on the question about how it's possible to develop and define protection standards, cutting across all these many different actors and agencies, I fully agree. I mean, but I do think we have managed, because there are many protection actors out there with different mandates, roles and responsibilities, and we continue to try to capture and incorporate this into the standards. But I think what is the trick, so to speak, is that we have exactly, as Guillaume was mentioning earlier, we have exactly not, these are not the how-to. These are standards, professional standards, but it's not the how-to, and it's not about specific protection activities, and therefore we are able to capture these protection professional standards for protection that can cut across. And also I would want to point to those with the more familiarity with the standards. Another way in which we try to capture this is also distinguishing between standards, which have a must in the language, and then guidelines. Recognizing again that there are some of these things that all of us must and should be doing, and then there are other things that only some of us, given our mandates and different roles and different lines of work and ways of working, are able to do, and therefore also having guidelines in there. Just a small one on the link between the standards and the Interagency Standing Committee Protection Policy. Again, I fully agree with Jenny. There is a close conceptual link, and I think it's especially linkages between the protection policy and Chapter 2 as it pertains to the emphasis on the protection analysis to build your strategy and your subsequent response, and then also, as Jenny was also mentioning, Chapter 6 on managing protection information. And again, I think there, in terms of the role that protection data and information can play in support of your protection analysis and your subsequent strategy and response. So I think that's where the link is.
Okay, great. Thanks for that. I'll pick up on something that you mentioned. So saying that standards mean something that we must do. We have another set of questions that have come in that I think link perhaps to that concept a bit loosely. The first. From David in DRC, he's wondering if the subject of enforceability of the standards has come up or will be addressed during the revision process, or if it's much too early in the process, or perhaps is never to be envisioned as something to link actually to the set of standards. If it's something we must do, is there an idea to actually enforce that must? Second question, and somewhat related, from Grace, wondering if there has been a systematic monitoring and evaluation process over the last years since the standard was first established in order to ensure that the standards have been effective in some way, and if so, has that been part of the review now to draw on any monitoring that may have taken place over the last years? And then a third question from Nellie, wondering, and this is now more forward-looking, and picking up on some comments from Jenny, how would you propose to implement the standards in the revised form moving forward? And more specifically, as I know that in general, the concept of implementation has come up, but more specifically, how will the standards be learned and practiced by humanitarian practitioners? Has there been some thought put in specifically to that? So for these set of three, let's perhaps change our order a bit. We'll go first to Guillaume, and then to Catherine, and then to Jenny. So over to you, Guillaume.
Thanks, Angered. These are very good questions, and it's not too early actually, because it's exactly some of the questions we are trying to address presently, even if we are far from having completed the revision process. But and I will in a way mix my answers to the three questions at the same time, because we don't pretend to have a monitoring process. We don't. And I think this was discussed at the very beginning of the work on the standards for the first edition. We don't pretend to have an enforcement mechanism outside of each organization. We rather stress the need for each organization and each individual to ensure to assume responsibility for compliance. And this is also stressed in Chapter 7 on professional capacity, recognizing that protection work is a complex endeavor, so it requires investment, training, supervision, proper management of human resources. So it's also for organizations. You can't expect to do proper protection work if you are working on in a way on a shoestring with people on very short-term contract. But similarly for NGOs and for donors, you can't expect an NGO to do very good work or to be able to invest sufficiently in this professional capacity if they have some very short-term budgeting and short-term development of project. So, but this is essentially a responsibility of individuals and of NGOs. Donors may also have a responsibility, and it's in a way double-edged. On one side, donors must support the agencies they fund in order to provide them the means to develop the professional capacity and the ability to comply with the standards. But the other side is that they must also demand compliance from the agencies they fund, and they shouldn't be funding projects if there is not the proper capacity to comply with the standards. But otherwise, we didn't develop an external enforcement mechanism, and that's nowhere close to our thinking. It's more a collective responsibility. Also, obviously, in the field, if we see some, we have a responsibility to influence others and to help others develop their competence. So if we see some practice in the field by another agencies where we feel there is some elements that could be that may not be fully compliant with the standards and that they would need to improve the way they work, there can be a very honest dialogue between two agencies or between two persons in order to try for better compliance. But at the same time, we want also to work a bit on lessons learned and good practices. So that's one of the plans to accompany the dissemination of the third edition, to be able to collect some good practices from the field regarding how specific challenges were addressed, how the interplay between different challenges to respond, between different standards to respond to specific challenges was chosen by different actors. So we would like to provide further guidance than just the standards, and this allows me to stress that we've just had confirmation, or we will be developing, in addition to the existing documents, we want to develop some additional parallel tools that would make the standards more accessible to different types of practitioners. So for instance, a shorter field version, an expanded e-learning. There is already an e-learning that exists, but that would need to be developed in order to make it a real learning experience, and we will be counting on support from the Swiss Ministry of Foreign Affairs for these additional work streams to complement the existing standards.
Okay, thank you very much, Guillaume. And we'll move now to Catherine for this second set of 3 questions. And feel free to answer them all together or to choose one or more. Over to you, Catherine.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I'll answer them all together and not so much to add. It's a continuous process of monitoring and feeding back, I believe, and I think this whole revision process and the feedback consultations leading up to this revision and the current ongoing consultation process with the survey, this webinar, other workshops that have taken place are indeed efforts to ensure that we do capture the field experiences, the good lessons learned, the good practice, capturing that and having that feed into the revised standards. When it comes to the enforcement, it is, as Guillaume said, we don't have an enforcement mechanism. It is a voluntary, you could argue, self-regulatory set of standards. That said, I believe that all of us in the advisory group representing a diverse group of agencies and individuals and protection actors, we continue to work to ensure that we have the standards disseminated and be used and monitor to what extent and how they are being used. And I think we have many examples from different agencies and actors on how the standards have been taken aboard in internal policies, in internal procedures, SOPs, in training efforts and so forth. And also, as Guillaume was mentioning, the excellent, if you're not familiar with it online, excellent e-learning that has been done for the current standards, and then the plans, as Guillaume was mentioning, of doing further efforts of making the standards more accessible and thereby ensuring, hopefully, the use and adherence to the standards.
Okay, thank you, Catherine. And now, Jenny, over to you.
Thanks. So I agree very much with everything that Guillaume and Catherine said. I think I would frame the question of enforceability and implementation very much in terms of I hope that the professional standards serve as a framework that anyone and everyone can use. Be it internally within your organizations, if you see an issue that needs attention, needs to be addressed through your human resources policies, through your program design or SOPs, as Catherine described, hopefully the professional standards give you a framework to do so. And I would say the same, absolutely, in an interagency setting. If you see a problem, if you see something that's not quite up to standard, or you feel is ethically, compromising our collective efforts, then hopefully the standards gives you a tool to raise those issues, be it bilaterally or in the context of a humanitarian country team or what have you. And one thing that I think is emerging as good practice in the humanitarian community, particularly amongst the NGOs, is more sort of joint initiatives and joint efforts. And again, the professional standards should serve as a framework that allows everyone to come onto the same page, through a process of analysis and assessment and program design and so on. And indeed, maybe this provides a jumping off point whereby, 2 or more organizations perhaps could agree to undertake some kind of peer review process. So, one NGO together with another NGO agree, why don't you come look at our practices and give us some input and advice on how we can improve. Let's use the professional standards as a basis for that assessment and that input, and vice versa. So I guess I'd love to hear some ideas through consultation at a practitioner and operational level about the different ways that the standards can be used, because indeed it is all voluntary. It is the energy and the initiative of our own efforts that help to turn the professional standards into a genuinely sort of operational tool. Over.
All right, thank you, Jenny. So it's been a wonderful discussion, and we are unfortunately nearing the end now of our time, but we have just enough time left to, as planned, we will go around one more time the floor and give each of our speakers today an opportunity for brief concluding thoughts. Of course, I think one of the main concluding thoughts or suggestions will be very much, again, as everyone has mentioned, for all of you, if you're able and have the time to try filling out at least parts of the survey that's now available. As mentioned, it is divided into different components for the different chapters of the standard, and you have the possibility there through the link that was sent through email, and I think also in the chat, to see both the original text and the proposed changes, so you can make some comments specifically in there per chapter. There was a question, in case you missed it, in the chat by someone who had to leave on the hour, but was asking really at what stage are you in the process? Is it still possible to make comments and to make suggestions? And Guillaume may want to say this again, but I'll just paraphrase quickly that indeed the process is still open. All suggestions are welcome. Yeah, Guillaume, you may wish to comment on that as well at the end. But let's, for closing remarks, go in the following order: first to Catherine, then to Jenny, and then finally we'll end with Guillaume. So over to you, Catherine.
Let me again thank PIAP and you, Ankarat, and all the colleagues online. It's been excellent to have you on board. My key message would be encourage everyone to have a look, and I think, it might be slightly overwhelming with the whole set of standards, but then if you're working in a particular field or with a particularly thematic area, have a look at that chapter or those specific standards, and feedback with your good suggestions and what makes sense for you, especially at a field level. Have we captured the challenges and the developments that have happened the last few years? Have we sufficiently captured them in these revised standards? And do we give sufficient examples and relevant ideas of how to manage many of these challenges that we're facing within our protection work? That would be my key message and encouragement to colleagues. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Catherine, and thanks so much for taking the time to be with us today. It's been really a pleasure having you on. And now we'll move to Jenny. Over to you.
Thanks very much to Ankarat and to colleagues at PIAP for organizing this. My questions are very much the same as Catherine's. Very much looking forward to the feedback, the advice, and the input that will come from this group. I would also just urge you to continue to remain engaged beyond the revision and this consultation process about the use of the standards. As Guillaume described, hopefully we'll be able to build, some online tools that allows for the collection of examples and the dissemination of examples about how the standards can be implemented. Hopefully that will also serve as a site or a place where people can engage in an ongoing way. Over.
All right, thank you, Jenny, and thanks also to you for being here today. And then finally, Guillaume, I'll give you the floor to close us out today.
Thank you. Well, thanks a lot, Ankarat, and the whole team at PIAP, Marcus and Liz in particular, for helping us with the survey, and also for organizing this webinar. It's extremely useful, and yes, without any doubt, for this question we got, yes, we still expect and need comments, because we only have draft documents and we want your input. So, and we also expect, so well, if you agree, if you want more precisions, more clarification, but also disagreement. If you think we are misguided in one point or another, don't hesitate to let us know, because yes, it's only draft documents, and we will be then processing all that information to try to reflect, produce something that we feel reflects the consensus of the community. So it may be difficult to bring new themes, because we won't be able to reconsult on them. So if it's entirely new themes, it may be difficult, but if it's something where just a few precisions, and if we have overwhelming inputs on some areas, we will take that into account. It's a document that is made by practitioners from practitioners. It's not just a bunch of people in Geneva inventing the rules, but we want something that really reflects the consensus of all those involved. And we absolutely need your feedback, and we are absolutely committed to taking into account that feedback. So thanks a lot to all. We count on this. It can, so the survey is the main avenue for the feedback, but it may also be sent. We can expect also NGOs to send us consolidated feedback from different practitioners via email. There are different ways in which it can be done. The survey doesn't need to be the only avenue. If you want to send us in another form, we will also be able to process it.
Okay, that's great. Thank you so much, Guillaume, and again, thanks for the opportunity to do this together. And all the best of luck in the process of reviewing all of the inputs that hopefully will come in. And I know. I think I probably speak for many people. We really look forward to see the result next year. So thanks again to all three of our speakers. Thanks so much for taking the time and for your presentations. Thanks to all of our participants for their active participation, contributions, some great questions. Really an excellent discussion. Thanks to Marcus and Liz for all of their work and the preparation and behind the scenes here during the event. As was mentioned, the recording for the session will be available shortly. That will be available on the event page. You can see the link. Let's see. Yep. There's the link for you available on the screen, and we will also send that link to you in the follow-up email also together, again with the link to the survey and the various related resources and documents that have been mentioned. So then that's it from us. Again, really a pleasure being with all of you today, and we look forward to the next opportunity to meet you in the virtual space. This is Anne Herod Lang signing off from PHAP in Geneva.